Hello, everybody, and welcome to Ice Time, where we dive into some of the big ideas around the NHL. I'm Mike Fink, and I'm joined by Andrew Mingioni, who I'm sure I mispronounced his name there. Thought I was going to say and it's actually Anthony
Got the
Mingioni.
la- you got the,
I
There you go. I
was
was gonna say you got the
thinking,
last you nailed the last name.
I was thinking, I'm going to say Andrew Mangiapane. I'm going to say Andrew Mangiapane, and I say Andrew Mingioni. So it's Anthony Mingioni here, who who covers the Flyers and a whole bunch of teams and the NHL at large, and covers
Mhm.
Philly sports. He covers the for Hockey Hot Stove. He also hosts Off the Post Radio. I'm sure I'm missing a few things, uh, and I mispronounced his name there. But Anthony, other than that, how are you doing on this Thursday afternoon?
Not too bad. It's been, again, getting you can feel that things are closing in on the start of hockey season. I'm in the middle of just finishing up a the on the recent trade that the Flyers and the can just did. Granted, in AHL forwards and Tucker Robertson and J.R. Avon, those two. So I'm finishing up an analysis piece up right now for Hockey Hot Stove, which will probably appear sometime tomorrow morning.
Yeah, that's a minor trade. I was thinking, is that worth diving into? When Trevor Zegras got traded, I actually had someone on Ice Time who
Yeah,
covers the Flyers, and I was like, okay, we actually have to dive in a little bit to this just because
it's
it's
not
a
a
big enough
it's not a
trade.
long
This one,
piece. But the logic behind it is certainly the fact that
yeah,
the Flyers are pretty they're trying to piece together as much center depth as they probably can. I mean, they did sign Lane Peterson in the offseason to add to the Phantom center depth. So I think that's what the trade was in mind. But I will say I'm a little I'm kind of disappointed because I really liked what I saw out of John Randall Avon in his time when he was with the Phantoms, when he was not with the Phantoms, but his developmental camp looked really good and his numbers looked pretty solid. And his first year looked there was promise, and then last year things just kind of stagnated for him. And again, the Flyers made the decision to move on from him just to add some center depth. So that's kind of the crux of the story here.
yeah. Lehigh Valley has a lot of those where it's you got to identify who your prospects are and who they aren't. That's a big thing with a lot of developmental teams,
Mhm.
with a lot of rebuilding teams, is finding out who you're building around and who are the players you have to kind of move out with that. But we're not diving into that. We are diving into the Flyers a bit though, because they are part of our big topic this week, which is now that it's September, hockey's around the corner. This is when I like looking, not grading the coaching hires as much as diving into them. And there were eight, if you could believe that. Flyers were one. We'll dive into their hire at the end, I'm sure, because it's a big one. There were eight hires, and this is the time where I could really dive into them a bit and look at them
Yeah.
closely. I kind of group them into three categories, which there is the first time hires or the newcomers on the block, and you don't know much about them. We kind of know a little bit about their background, and then there's those second chance coaches that, okay, maybe this is the second time's a charm here, where they're getting that new look. And then there's the retreads or slash the ones we've seen a lot, and for better or worse. So we'll dive into that as well. There's those three categories, and I kind of want to start with the newcomers here, which are
Mhm.
Marco Sturm, Dan Muse, Glenn Gulletson. They go to the Bruins, the Penguins, and the Stars, respectively. And it's hard to try to pick out what stands out for any of them. But I'll ask you: do any of these names kind of stand out for you, or does anything from this group really grab your attention?
Muse with Pittsburgh is a fascinating one. I think it's very much a signal of Pittsburgh beginning the process of starting to transition away from the glory era of Crosby, Malkin, Letang. Those players are still there, but to me, feels like it's like the first time where we're starting to feel like um, that Kyle Dubas is starting to get a bit more of an imprint on this team, and they have to start transitioning. And Muse has had a good reputation as a coach as he's come up through the ranks. People I've talked to really like him and think if you're trying to move into a new era, that a post Crosby era. potentially. I mean, Crosby will call it, as we all know, Sidney Crosby will call his shot, whether he decides he wants to stay, through retirement with the Penguins, or if he decides he wants to go one last time at a championship elsewhere. But Muse to me is probably the guy that's the most fascinating, because he's going to have I think it's going to be challenging in many ways for him, as well as he kind of moves and tries to get into sort of what his philosophies are, how that will be taken in by, the veterans of the staff. Are they veterans players who are they going to be willing to sort of buy in to what it is he wants to do?
Yeah, and it's interesting with that in mind. Actually, that brought up where it's hard to win over a locker room where Crosby and Malkin run the show for all intents and purposes. When you join a
Yeah.
team where there are those veterans, more than just captains that are just they've been there long enough where they run, it's their team. It's hard to come in and
Hmm.
kind of establish your culture. And the question is, maybe not though, because with Dan Muse, he's coming in. It's the long term in mind. Where when you're thinking with Kyle Dubas there, he's there for I think he had a 7 year contract, so he's still there for a while. And you have Dan
Yeah.
Muse who's there for a while.
Yes.
3 years from now, it's going to be their team. So it makes me wonder. I'll follow up on this. How much does he need to get that buy-in from those veterans? Maybe it's just he come in and it's his team as much as it's he can bring in his own style, he can bring in his system, and knowing that they're on the way out, whether it's retiring or trade with
Yeah.
trades and whatnot, that it is rebuild. So it's just kind of get your system in place now.
Yeah, but I do think it's important that if those players, depending on what their futures lie, and again, we focus in very much on the big three of Crosby, Malkin, and Letang. It's the triumvirate. Um, but they have to also realize, again, with Sullivan, leaving, that what their what that buy-in is. You can bring. I think here's a way of sort of for them to balance with Muse the carrying forward, so to speak, of the winning tradition of sort of what they believe are the right way of doing things, and passing it on to the next gen, the younger forwards who are going to be there. Even if there was a certain style that they might have preferred to play, if they buy in, it goes a very long way with the younger players that are coming up to the system in Pittsburgh. That if they're willing to do what is necessary, then that'll follow suit, and it makes things easier in this. Well, I shouldn't say easier, but it it may accelerate things with some of the younger players that the Penguins are going to try to bring along or draft in the coming years. Because again, we just where they're at as a team right now is there's prospects in the system, but not as much. There's still the payment that they had from all the years of trying to pursue a Stanley Cup while and keeping the window open for the triumvirate. In my mind, in this case, this is where almost in some ways those players, if their intention is to stay in Pittsburgh, certainly for this season, it's kind of I feel like it's almost a little bit of they have to kind of pay back the organization in some ways, if they want if the objective is to stay and to kind of provide that pillar, and to say if this is what our coach wants to do and this is what we're doing, we feel like it's something that's good for the future, then that's, I think, it would be an important thing to help Dan Muse be able to handle the transition.
It's kind of interesting with Dan Muse in Pittsburgh. It's similar when I look at Boston and Marco Sturm, where the team I think is more fascinating than the coach, where the situation the coach is being put into is more fascinating because similar Marco Sturm, you have those veterans there who've been there for a while. I mean, though I know they traded Brad Marchand, so you're losing one of those core players, but
Yeah.
McAvoy, Pasternak, those are just true leaders of your team who've been there for a while. And you're bringing this new coach, and they are at a crossroads, more so than the Penguins, I think. But it's more fascinating the team, I think, than the actual coach itself. The coach, I don't know much about either. I will say with Dan Muse, one of the things I do like with the Pittsburgh hiring is that they also brought in Todd Nelson, who has been in the AHL for a while.
Yes.
He's one of those coaches you want to, he won back-to-back Calder Cups with Hershey. He's one of the coaches you want around
Hmm.
in to you want around in that locker or in that rebuilding setting just because
Yeah.
he's worked with those players as well. You have a young coach who's going to be there for the long term, but Nelson's a good bridge, I think, with all this in mind. So that's kind of something that fascinates me there.
Hmm.
Uh, and yeah, and then the other one, grouping Glenn Gulletson. Gullettson's the outlier here in the sense that he's been in the organization. This is his first time. He's an assistant. He gets the first time job, but he's been around for a while. So him and Neil Graham, you group
Hmm.
him as well together. It just feels like okay, you're keeping
Yeah.
status quo. You're kind of keep things together. But other than that, yeah, I don't really have much more to add on that. Any extra thoughts on this trio? Because I mean, Sturm and Muse kind of have a lot of this overlap, and then Gullettson's the
There
outlier.
is.
But this is the first time. This is the trio first time coaches where
Yeah.
anything to really stand out with any of them
Yeah.
other
Well,
than
I mean, for me with Sturm, again, with Marshawn now staying in, obviously staying in Florida for likely for the remain. I'm not gonna say for the remainder of his career, but we'll see how many more years he plays. But I think certainly having. I think in some ways, I think Sturm may even has even more of a chance to kind of have a chance to put his imprint on. But again, I know he's coached. I know he's began his coaching career. I know with the German national team. He's been an assistant coach with the Kings. He's been in. And again, he's paid his dues to get to become an NHL head coach. He's gone through all the different levels. He's been an ace assistant coach. He coached the Ontario Reign. Um, Boston's it feels like Boston's run recently has been just a lot of rotten luck in a lot of cases, and we also take into account the fact of how the Swayman thing really threw them off last year.
well,
I
just a
think,
terrible offseason, right? Where
yeah, what,
Swayman's Nikita
yeah,
Zadorov was a flop of a signing. Elias
yeah.
Lindholm, who they brought in
Who
to be
they
the top line center.
pursued him. It was you couldn't whenever you were looking at any sort of whispers of NHL trade. Well, Boston wants Lindholm. We know Boston wants Lindholm. The old story is again sometimes when you if you're looking for a white whale, it may not go the way you want it to go. And it certainly didn't in this case for Boston. It was just expectations and everything. And sometimes, when you're trying to get that one more crack at it and trying to restore your team after obviously having an incredible year and then losing, in the first round. And it's just everything has seemingly backslid for Boston since then. So Sturm, I think, has a challenge in front. In some ways, there's even more expectation in Boston. I think that there's still good players in Boston, and they're still young enough. There's some young enough players there that they should be even maybe even more competitive than the Pittsburgh Penguins should be with Muse. Where I feel like with Muse, the expectations will be a little bit lighter. It's just a matter of knowing that you've got to deal with knowing you have to deal with the
Yeah.
triumvirate. Whereas in Boston, it may not be quite the same situation there, and the expectation of the fans is, well, we still got guys in place. We're still a good team. They should be, Sturm should be able to right the ship relatively quickly. So we're going to see in that regard. I like Sturm. And again, his history with the Bruins helps as well from being on the team on the Cup team. So, and he also the advantages from is that he's a relatively he's not has he's been a hockey player recently, and understands players, modern day players. So I think that will work to his advantage. Gullettson's an interesting one for me, getting the opportunity again with that, to obviously coach the Dallas Stars. Again, and he's won 7 years now, I believe, that he was with Edmonton as an assistant coach. I think it's along that line. It was a pretty long while. I think I know that he had been with their organization, and there was some weird stuff that happened. I think because he had a we have to remember he had a good record in Calgary. He did. He had a good record in Calgary, but the problem was a solid record. But the one time he was in the postseason, they got swept out, and that sort of puts a little bit of a sour taste, I think, in some people's mouth. And they're like, if you're looking at a retread, like, in this case, was there somebody else that you might have looked at? Or maybe, would a Quenville have been someone that Dallas would have considered? But Again, he has previous organizational experience, and you never know. Sometimes the second go around, we've seen it happen sometimes where it doesn't click in the first place, but maybe it will here. He's got, he's had an opportunity to gather a lot of experience now. What I've gathered from people I've talked to in Edmonton is that he was a well-respected assistant coach. I just Dallas is in a weird spot. Like they've got the depth. They've got the talent to be to potential to be in that running for a Stanley Cup. You got to have the right guy to press the buttons, though, and
Yeah.
it remains to be seen. I don't know.
What's funny is Gallatin was there so long ago. I actually forgot that he was hired there. I thought he was the first.
Yeah, he
I was like,
was. Yeah, it
wait,
was. He was with Dallas. I think it was between. I'm gonna say like I think it was 2011. It was like 2 or 3 seasons, I think, maybe around 2013, 2014, and then he ended up going to Calgary. So this is
it just
technically his third go around. Dallas was in a different, but Dallas was also in a different state at that point in 2011 and during that era too.
I just grouped him with the first year guys, but he's probably he's more of a second year or third year type of coach. It's just he hasn't been coaching in a while.
It's
Feels
just
like a
it's been
first
7 years. He's been with the Oilers
yeah.
for I think 7 years. So
Which
and yeah.
which I guess like that's a little bit of like what Quenville feels like a little bit, but we'll get to him. But this idea of the second chance, which is that he's coming back and he's got a second chance at the organization. You have two coaches in that group, which is Jeff Blashill and Lane
Mm.
Lambert, who are really getting the second chance in the NHL, where you could say their first hiring was like, okay, they were given a bad hand. Just want to make sure I should make sure Blashill was like off the top of my head. I assume he wasn't hired anywhere else, but I think it was Red Wing. He was with the Red Wings for a while. And then it was like they fired him, and then he was
He was a Red Wings head coach. Yeah, he was with the Red
yeah,
Wings,
and
and then went back to then went to Tampa and
he was an
worked, I
assistant
think,
there.
and worked there. So, but yeah, Blashill, it's an interesting alignment here, Mike. I would say it's an interesting alignment where, in this case, he probably has maybe better high level pieces than he had in Detroit. We need obviously what's going to happen. We're going to need to see obviously what happens. I think with the direction things go with Connor Bedard. I know they want him to succeed as a center. The question is, we'll see. I think this year we'll be able to figure that out for sure. But I do think they want to get a good idea, and obviously Frank Nazar in this case is another really good piece that they have in place there. At Blashill, the Red Wings, it again, it wasn't great there. They had one postseason appearance, I think, in his time there. So the question is going to be, since he left and went to coach under John Cooper, what does he observe? What does he absorb from Cooper? The lessons that he's learned, and now, with this Blackhawks team that is pushing and trying, they got a lot of young talent that's on the way, where he can direct them. And if the second time around, he's the classic second time around opportunity here for him for sure.
What does he bring to the table? Like that's what I'm wondering because I look at the hiring with Blashill. I'm like, this is
Hmm.
kind of underwhelming for a team that should be not a destination per se. I mean, a little bit of a destination, but a place that coaches should want to go to. You've as much as it's a rebuilding team, there's a good young core to build around. It seems like an attractive spot, and it felt like they aimed a bit low with Blashill. I mean, what does he bring? And I guess the same thing with Lambert. What do they bring that I'm missing? Because I look at the hire and I'm like, these are the type of Jeff Blashill's the type of hire when I take a step back and look at it. If it was any other team, you take away the name, you're saying this is a team that didn't get their top guy,
Hmm.
didn't get their top hire, which in Chicago's case it's actually true, but also is not a destination, is like a Buffalo Sabres who have to hire someone because they can't bring in their guy. What is Jeff Blashill bringing that I'm missing? Because maybe I am wrong, and I'm saying, okay, maybe he's the perfect coach to take them from rebuilding to the next
I'd
step.
have I'd have to think, Mike, that this in some ways is this is where the interview process is really important. And invariably, you're in any kind of a job interview, if you were at a different place and then you move, and you take a different job that might have been working under someone who's was well respected and and then you have the opportunity. And the very question that would probably be asked is, so from the time you were in Detroit and now you were working under John Cooper, what are the things that you've added? What are the ideas that you have kind of taken from him that that you think would work with our organization for where we're at? And again, even if he wasn't their first choice, there has to be something in there that concepts wise, if he's bringing over Tampa Bay Lightning concepts that he's learned under John Cooper. That to me, that to me may it be and again, you look at his age too, he's 51. So you may look at him and say, hey, we give this a go. And is a relatively young coach. I mean, 51 for age for a coach is relatively young, in the NHL. I mean, compare him with Rick Tocchet, who's 61 years of age and with a young roster. We'll get to that. I think that's the way they're kind of looking at it, and just knowing that if this is going to be a sort of a longer term process, because that's what I kind of feel like here with Chicago, that they may have thought they needed to accelerate things sooner, and then maybe they're realizing, let's try to incorporate things here. Let's try to see what he brings in. Does it unlock Connor Bedard to another level? Does Frank, and they've already taken the long term swing. Obviously, we just talked about with Nazar and other players that they're looking to that may come along here in this circumstance. So to me, that's where I kind of read the situation, is that's maybe he kind of, the classic, maybe I don't want to say wowed them, but impressed them enough in the interview process that they say to themselves, let's give this a go and see how this goes.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Where with Blashill in Detroit, he was given time. I think he had I think close to seven, or he was there for a while, to the point where you could
Yeah.
tell they were going to give him time to try to rebuild the Red Wings, and he didn't. I mean, like, I think the big thing though, that's what stands out for me, is that the
Mhm.
end of his tenure with the Red Wings, they look like a team that was checked out, and a team that was not only not making the playoffs but bottoming out at the wrong time. And March, April is when you get to see whether a team still believes in their coach or not, and they did not. Maybe that's changed since Tampa. It is
Mhm.
interesting that he's been in the Tampa behind the Tampa bench, and I think there's this perception around the league that it's some sort of like coaching tree, like Andy Reid in the NFL or something, or Bill Walsh back in the day, where
Mhm.
every great coach is coming from there. Derek Lalonde was hired by the Red Wings too. He was an assistant.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's to be known there, obviously with Yzerman being the former Tampa
yeah,
Bay Lightning general manager, and that sort of conveyor belt of, hey, Tampa really did successful. Let's incorporate that here in Detroit, and sometimes and there's times when it does work, and there's times and times in this circumstance where it just did not. And like any coach, if you're there for a while and your team is not, that's the one thing about that Red Wings team, is the fact there were some good players there, but they never kind of had that sort of franchise linchpin, close to top of the lineup guy that everybody talks about, that they had during the Yzerman and Fedorov era, where you had that one guy. Larkin's a good player. I like Dylan Larkin a lot. Larkin to me is your classic sort of your second. He's like that second line guy to the whoever your tops closer to superstar player is, and that's one of the things that I have to kind of keep in mind. And a lot of, and I hate to say it also, as well as some of the, Yzerman's free agent work in Detroit hasn't exactly been fantastic either, even during the time that Blashill was head coach. So if you're not exactly augmenting the lineup with players that are going to help things move along, that's going to be tough.
yeah. You wonder if maybe in Detroit he was given a bad hand, and now in Chicago, there's a chance that if he's given time and he's going to be part of that rebuild, that he could really show the most there. With Lane Lambert, do you think the 1 year behind the Maple Leafs bench changed anything? I think he was kind of also given a bad hand with the Islanders,
Yes.
where he
Yeah.
was an assistant for years, and everyone's saying he's going to be the next great head coach. He's going to be the next great head coach, and then he goes to the Islanders, where he's hired from within, where he's got to go from the assistant to the head coaching position
Yeah.
on the same team, and he was kind of given a bad hand there. Do you think with Seattle that things go differently, where you start to see maybe a better version of him, or in the second chance, or do you think his run-ins in Toronto, where I mean the style they play in Toronto is very different from the style he coached in New York and might even coach in Seattle? So what do you think all that makes him a better coach, or do we think you'll see a more impressive run here?
I think this is a little bit more of a lottery ticket here that they're hoping is going to hit. Sometimes in this circumstance, Lambert's also not young; he's 60 years old. So we have to remember that most people think he's younger than he actually is. So there's nothing. Again, it feels like Seattle. If we're talking about Blashill being one of those guys that was further down the coaching list for who they were trying to hire, Lambert also kind of feels that way too. And I know, I'm sure, I'll get arguments with regards to that, but two things can be true at the same time. You can absolutely say he got a bad, he had a bad hand. And again, I can never, when you talk about the Islanders, you obviously can never shake the latter part of Luke Lamoriello. The long hand of Lou Lamoriello is always there, kind of hovering over, and he basically sets the roster. And again, to Lou's credit, when up to the point of when, the COVID bubble hit, the Islanders, were knocking on the door with a couple conference final finishes. So, hey, Lou's way might work again. But invariably they didn't have enough scoring. And that was one of the biggest that was and still remains one of the biggest problems that the New York Islanders have, even under Patrick Waugh. So I do feel like, again, Lambert, there's only 32 jobs, so you take the opportunities when you take them. And also we have to take into account the fact of, you know, their assistant coach too in Seattle and Jess Campbell. And I would hope that coaching candidates were willing, and I get it. A lot of other coaches who have power want to bring in their people. And we know Lambert was more than willing to work to have Jess Campbell on his coaching staff in this circumstance. And I do think that certainly helped him with regards to getting the job in Seattle, whereas other coaches that might have had wanted their own, with more, I guess, reputation, clout, whatever, want their own coaches.
Like the difference between bringing in your own staff and not, which I think is you're seeing with Lambert, is that he's not bringing his own staff. It's interesting you mentioned the issues of scoring, and one of the things that Lambert does is at least did with the Islanders, is tried to speed things up, tried to make them a high flying offensive team, and the bottom fell out where the defense wasn't there. It's interesting because
Right.
Seattle's issue has, since they've been a franchise, they have not had scoring. And similar, where you mentioned the Red Wings they don't have that true
Yeah.
star that
Mhm.
Seattle has not had a lot of offense since their inception, and they do not have that star player. They don't
Not
have
a
that. So maybe
bellwether. Yeah, exactly. Not a bellwether, not a star player. I mean, there's certainly hopes with regards to some of the players that they certainly have. Matty Beniers. I like Matty a lot. Is he a
well,
top line
Beniers and
center?
Shane Wright, where it's like those are your
Right,
prospects
I'm
that maybe
curious
can.
about. I just don't know yet. I just don't know yet with Wright.
Yeah,
I like him. I do. I'm always hesitant with any young player, even with their taken in the fourth overall in the draft. There's still time, that I like to afford them to kind of spread their wings, so to speak.
yeah. With it is interesting that maybe with Lambert that he unlocks that offense a bit, and they have the defense there, and they have Joey, they have the goaltending, but if he could unlock that offense, maybe it's a
Yeah.
combination. At the same time, you're talking about that this is a set, not your ideal hire, and a part of me does think, yeah, this is why it's interesting grouping Blashill and Lambert together, is that these are the type of hires that teams that aren't destinations make. And the Kraken at this point, I feel like they've put themselves in the spot where they're not an attractive
Well, they
spot.
made a decision. We know that they made an organizational decision. There was a lot of pressure, I think, when they first were established because of what Vegas did. And everybody expected, I think, Seattle to kind of go to sort of follow that blueprint. And Ron Francis, anybody who knew him from his time as Carolina Hurricanes general manager, He is of the he is the mindset of the slow build, of the build up. And I think there's some, as we said, there's some good solid organizational structure, good bones, I guess you could say, to the Kraken organization. But invariably, once you get to year three, and especially when you make the playoffs and win a playoff round, the expectations start to go up substantially.
Well,
Yeah,
well, part of it is that they're on their third hire in 3 seasons, or in the third in the franchise existence. And what
yeah.
is interesting is that I mean, I'm just saying they're not in a destination. We hear about taxes, no taxes. You know where there are no taxes? Washington State. And players don't really want to go there right now. They're like players do not go to Seattle, and it speaks to what they've become, which is, I mean, they're just not that spot. I mean, maybe what's
And the
interesting is
newness
that
again as an organization, the newness of them being an expansion team, and the success and the one playoff run under Dave Hackstall. You're right though. Again, in terms of it should. I mean, I love Seattle. I mean, personally, I think it's a. I visited. I was there this summer. I think it's a great. I think it's an awesome
it
city.
would be a great
I,
hockey city.
it
It
should
would be.
and it should. I would love for there to be sort of a Washington State. Much like if you had, something that's a little closer to home, so to speak, in this case, kind of like what the Flyers have with Lehigh Valley, and something that's closer by in this circumstance. But again, that's kind of besides that, maybe just more besides the point in this case. It's just I would love for the Kraken to be sort of a more of a destination, because you have that point of, and I think of the NHL, you have to be cognizant of that as well, because again, if you're trying to establish that western border of teams, in this case, if in the future you're looking at expansion and you're looking at potentially, maybe Portland as another team in the NHL, you want to have some strong built-in rivalries. It's just I don't feel like Seattle and Vancouver to me should be natural rivals in this case, but you never get that feel.
You don't, because I
You
mean,
just
yeah,
don't.
it's been that way. And I mean, and that what's been interesting is I feel like this. It's actually what's interesting. I feel like the Lambert hire, as much as it feels like a second chance, it actually puts a lot of pressure on Ron Francis. And well, now they brought in Jason Botterill, where it's get this right. And they're the type of team that's interesting because a lot of people mentioned Lamorello with Buffalo. That Lamorello and Seattle could be something maybe to keep in mind in the future. Just that's a GM conversation that I don't
Yeah.
think we really have the mental capacity for, but I digress. All right, we'll take a quick break. We'll be right back.